let's get right to it. The next kind of zipper is called a lap zipper, okay? And it basically, this isn't my best example in the universe, but it basically is like this, where you have a piece of fabric that is sewn to the zipper the way you would do the center zipper on one side, but then on the other side you take your fabric and you fold it a little bit so that it will lap over the zipper and cover it. So what you would do with the lap zipper is one side would be sewn the exact same way as the center zipper. The other side you would sew only up into a certain point, and then where you want it to lap over, you kind of just fold it a little over so that it sews a flap over the zipper, so that you would just turn this over and oh, there's my zipper, you know. So it's hard for me to explain to you guys without actually sewing it, and I'm sorry I can't actually sew it for you, but that's a lap zipper. It's not super commonly used, so you guys don't really have to worry about it, but I would experiment and try it because it's a great way of hiding zippers. Something similar to the lap zipper is your fly, and that's what you see on jeans, where it's basically a whole bunch of extra pieces that have been sewn together to make the same idea as the lap zipper, but it looks a little bit better and it's a little bit stronger, but it has the same purpose as the fly, where you've got a little piece that's covering up your zipper. Now this is a lot more complicated. There's actual pieces of pattern you need to cut out to do this, and there's specific steps to take to do it. It's a little bit tricky, so I don't suggest it for anyone who's a beginner. I know when I tried learning to do it by myself, I couldn't do it. I couldn't understand the instructions and the pattern pieces. If you're a little braver than I am, go right ahead and try. Hopefully it works out for you. But I honestly was only able to do it in class when I had instructions right in front of me. Unfortunately, I have no idea where those are anymore. But yeah, I don't suggest doing the fly if you're a beginner. It's not really necessary for most projects, only really jeans. So I don't think there's really a point in it. Unless you're like, really, I want to do the fly, then go ahead. The last zipper, and this is my favorite one, is called an invisible zipper. And I actually hated this zipper in the beginning because it gave me the most problems. The invisible zipper though is super cool, and you don't see it often enough. It's basically a zipper that you cannot see, hence the name invisible zipper. So my zipper is actually in here, and it's totally covered by the fabric. And the way that the invisible zipper is made is what makes it invisible. This is the front. It looks like a backward zipper. This is the front, and all you can see is this little tab. Okay, and this is the back. The back looks like the front of the regular zipper, so it's actually like an inside-out backward zipper. And the cool thing is when you have it zipped on, you can't see any zipper teeth because they're all covered and they're in the other side. You cannot really do an invisible zipper properly using a regular zipper foot or even a regular foot. You need a specific foot called an invisible zipper foot. This is the invisible zipper foot for a domestic machine. It's plastic. It's only like $1 or $2. It has 3 of these, so no matter what size of the machine you have, this will fit on, even if you have an industrial, but this is better for the domestic machines that most of us have at home. I find this a bit difficult to work with, which is why I especially cannot do a demonstration of how to sew the invisible zipper, because I don't have an industrial machine here at home. And I prefer doing my invisible zippers with an industrial machine, because with an industrial machine I can use this invisible zipper foot, which works so much better. It's expensive though, that's the problem. It's $30 just for this little guy. But it saves me so much aggravation that it was totally worth it. Basically what you do is you would sit him onto your think I got that backwards. You would sit him onto your zipper and he would just basically just follow exactly where he's supposed to go and sew right underneath the teeth, because when you sew an invisible zipper, you're sewing underneath the teeth. That's how you get it so close so that you don't see any zipper. And I love these guys. These guys are wicked awesome. But if you don't have an invisible zipper foot, especially if you don't have an industrial machine, these are harder to do. So you might want to practice a bit before you graduate to invisible zippers. But once you do, you're going to love them. I love them. So anyways, that is my little tutorial on zippers. I hope it was helpful. I hope I got everything covered. And sorry I couldn't actually sew them for you, but and I hope it was helpful. So thanks a lot, you guys. Bye. Okay, now there's one other thing that I want to mention, and it is not zipper specific. It's a question that I got today, and it's from Naruto 14M. Is it Naruto 1 fan? I'm not sure. But yeah, you sent me a question, and I did respond to it on my comments. But I wanted to address it here because I thought, genius question, right? This question was actually a comment on one of my pattern making parts. So they're actually referring to pattern and cutting out patterns in this question. And the question is, my dad says not to cut on a line, but outside of it, so that I leave some room for sewing. And you say to cut on the line. What is better for a first timer like me? Basically, what they're referring to is when you have a pattern piece and you're cutting it out of your pattern sheet, there's lines that you cut on, and I'm telling everybody cut on the line, and her dad or his dad is saying, no, you don't cut on the line, you cut away from the line. I want to ask, like, what is your dad into sewing? Because he's half right. And I'm surprised because I've never met a dad who sewed, so that's cool. But he's only half right. Your dad is talking about something called seam allowance. And what seam allowance is it is an amount of space between the actual pattern piece and the edge, so that when you sew, you're not sewing right at the edge of your pattern piece or at the edge of your fabric. You're sewing a little bit in so that your whole thing doesn't fall apart. Regularly, your seam allowance is about 3/4 of an inch from the edge of the pattern piece. Now, none of this is anything you guys have to remember. I'm just explaining it to you because that's what it is, but it's not something you really have to know. The point is, and the answer to your question is, when you buy a commercial pattern, they have already taken into account that you need some seam allowance in order to sew into your fabric. So no, you do not have to leave an inch or a centimeter or any space between your line and where you cut. Cut on the line. Always cut on the line, because they have already accounted for that seam allowance space. If you cut either inside the line or outside of the line, you are changing the size of your pattern piece. So don't do it. Plus, they have accounted for seam allowance so that it's the same all the way around. So you don't have to worry about cutting half an inch on one side and an inch on the other because you were blindly cutting. No, cut on the line. Always cut on the line, because if you don't, you're gonna destroy your pattern. You're gonna ruin it. So no, always cut on the line. The only time you would ever add your seam allowance, add that 3/4 of an inch or a centimeter or an inch or whatever you want to add, the only time you would ever do that is if you personally are drafting the pattern from scratch using your measurements or somebody else's measurements, and you're drafting it yourself 100% from scratch, and you need to add seam allowance then because you didn't draft seam allowance. You can't draft seam allowance. You have to do it afterward. But yeah, that's the only time you would add seam allowance. Do not do it if you are using a commercial pattern, because it's already been done. If you need it to be a little bigger, then just cut the bigger size. Okay? So yeah, that's the answer to your question. Do not cut off the line. Always on the line. Okay? I think that was it. So, hope you guys enjoyed, and thanks for watching!